Gojo's death against Sukuna has left everyone speechless, leaving us with multiple questions. Like, why did Gojo feel sorry for the man that killed him, having empathy and love for him? This is the same man that wiped entire clans, violated his own foster son. Bruh, Sukuna is a cannibal and is the personification of the devil. But how does this make any sense? Well, we have discovered the answer to all these questions and more as we dive deep regarding the true meaning of strength and the real reason the author Gege Akatami decided to let Gojo die. Their fight took place on December 24th, marking Gojo's death anniversary shared with his best friend Geto. The narrative set both of them up as enlightened beings, representing the idea of an immovable object facing an unstoppable force. In fact, Gojo is so powerful that Gege admitted in an interview that he finds it hard to write the story with him around. Thus, the whole idea of him being sealed away was created, so he didn't have to. In every other chapter of Gojo vs Sukuna, we see all sorcerers witnessing their strength in full display and claiming how impossible it is. Impossible for anyone except the strongest. This entire idea is linked back to Suguru Geto's statement in chapter 78, where Gojo claimed Geto's idea of killing all the monkeys was impossible, but he questions Gojo's arrogance because nothing is really impossible for him with his strength. Questioning his existence. Are you the strongest because you are Satoru Gojo, or are you Satoru Gojo because you're the strongest? This philosophy defines his entire character from then on. In the end, his own best friend had drawn a line between himself and Gojo, the one person who understood him the most and once upon a time shared the title of strongest with him. The line Geto had created is the very same one Gojo later claims exists for himself and Sukuna when compared to everyone else in the world in chapter 236. So due to both of them being the strongest, Gojo can empathize with Sukuna and the magnitude of the shared solitude more than anyone else. He states, "I love everyone and don't feel lonely now, but along the way there was a line I drew, not as a human but as a living creature." The analogy he gives is of a flower that can be admired for its beauty and bloom, but he can never ask the flower to understand him. This is a barrier between Gojo and the world, even his own students. And in parallel, we see this line portrayed with Sukuna in chapter 219. He was referred to as a deity and a monster. And if you think about it, both of these dudes shared similar experiences. Both Gojo and Sukuna were threatened by assassins from rival clans. For example, Sukuna had to deal with the Fujiwara forces, whom he killed instantly, whilst Gojo had to deal with the curse users who wanted his bounty. Therefore, the line between Sukuna and society was set, as his overwhelming power made them admit that they must forcefully show no ill will and seek friendly relations due to their fear and idea of him, just like Gojo. In parallel, Gojo suffered the same consequences with the title of strongest, as in chapter 96, curse users lament that Gojo had taken away their freedom. And since the world works on equivalent exchange and balance, if someone tries to take my freedom away, I won't hesitate to take theirs. The clear comparison between the two continues as both Gojo and Sukuna believe sorcery is a selfish sport, where the story supports this idea, as every single person has developed by following this philosophy. Case in point, Megami in chapter 58, which was the exact reason he could do domain expansion, as he remembered both Gojo and Sukuna's words to manifest his will to try, instead of summoning Mahoraga. Another example is Yuta fighting for himself for the first time, rather than protecting his loved ones against Ryu and Uro. This allowed him to exceed his capabilities, clutching the fight and feeling exhilaration like no other. However, like Uru's comment to Yuta, there is always a limit of trying to embody this selfish nature of Jujutsu, but not for sorcerers like Sukuna, who have the ability to disregard all else, just like a natural calamity, which is why others will never truly understand them. A quick analogy to this idea would be a peasant not being able to relate to a king. Gojo's limitless is an irony. When we were introduced to his domain expansion, he states, "Isn't it ironic given everything, but unable to do anything?" His entire story arc also portrays this, as he has failed many of his life goals. And upon his death, he claims after giving Sukuna everything he had, his intent was to convey an understanding. Therefore, they could teach each other about love, but Gojo feels like he failed. And remember, Kenjaku told us that the techniques of a sorcerer dictate their world, and life is poetic in that regard. This couldn't be more true for Gojo's limitless, as it literally created a wall between himself and the world. From the moment of his birth, disrupting the balance of the world, Gojo was connected by fate to Tengen and the responsibility that comes with being the strongest. Gojo lived in a bubble, being told of his title since childhood and being spoiled rotten. This created a perception of the world that things only have value when measured with strength, even his own existence. The purpose of his power only came after Geto had betrayed him. Looking back, we can see Geto was the moral compass between the two, as Gojo had an ego. He utilized sorcery for himself rather than protecting others, as they claimed in chapter 236 upon his death. So when Geto labeled him just like the others in the world, Gojo lost the last remaining human connection. No one could truly relate to him afterwards, and the bubble just got bigger as he let his strength define his existence. Even Shoko, his childhood friend, called Gojo an idiot for always acting like he was all alone, when in reality, she was right there beside him. However, since she didn't have a strong curse technique and only knows RCT, Gojo didn't allow his bubble to burst. He does claim to foster a strong group of students and believes Yuta and the others can reach his level of strength, but Kenjaku quickly dismissed this idea when Gojo was sealed, that Yuta can never be like him, reaffirming Gojo's loneliness. This proves Gojo's self-actualization of who he is entirely flawed. He self-imposed barriers onto himself and isn't free, unlike Sukuna. Therefore, Sukuna isn't affected by this idea of loneliness, as he claims it is greedy in chapter 237. Sukuna doesn't even identify with human morality or the psychology of it, as he is above it like a new species that functions on a different plane of existence. At the end of the day, upon Gojo's death, he comes to terms with the errors of his way and the shortcomings of his ideal self. Since Gojo's expectations weren't met by the fight with Sukuna, he felt bad for both sides and felt no satisfaction like he presumed he would. In actuality, all Gojo wanted was for his best friend to be by his side forever. During the airport scene, he told Geto everything, opening up about his feelings. He just wanted to be with his loved ones and feel normal again. Now you're probably wondering, ABD, I don't get why the story keeps focusing on loneliness, and what does it have to do with love? Well, I have the answer. The idea of loneliness is highlighted with Sukuna starting in chapter 219. Yoruzu, an ancient sorcerer, fell in love with Sukuna, projecting the same idea of loneliness onto him just like Gojo did. She was a master and could do as she pleased with her selfish nature. Due to this, she never had the opportunity to ever develop any meaningful relationships, as everyone would fear or label her. That hick committed acts of savagery, yet received an appointment here in the capital. That explains it all. However, after seeing Sukuna and being able to tell how strong he was. She realized his beauty much like a flower that Gojo stated in chapter 236. She believed she could understand Sukuna as they share the same problem. This causes Yoruzu to have a new goal, where much like Gojo, she wanted to remedy Sukuna's loneliness with the idea of love. To achieve this, Sukuna needs to exert every inch of his power and feel satisfied. Remember, in the afterlife, Haibara and Nanami mentioned that Gojo lives for Jujutsu and is perverted with his use of sorcery, as it stems from his selfish need to bust nuts with his opponent. Everyone's comment of how Gojo lives for Jujutsu and does not wield it to protect others brings the story full circle from his fight against Toji, where Gojo claimed he was no longer fighting for Rika or the protection of others, rather himself and the requirement to become the strongest. This ecstasy allowed him to evolve and become the honored one, referring to Buddha himself using his quote about heaven and earth. Therefore, both Gojo and Sukuna's selfish nature with Jujutsu made them beings that evolved to godhood. Hence, Gojo even accepts Kenjaku's terms to wait till December 24th, rather than just killing Sukuna at 15 fingers with an incomplete body. Thus, Kenjaku said Gojo is best when he is alone, and all his friends claim he should just complete all missions on his own. He purposely took a gamble and a harder decision because he wanted to satisfy himself, letting Sukuna get to his full power. This leads to your next question. Why did Gojo think about Sukuna's feelings and be disappointed instead of focusing on saving the world and his friends? Well, Gojo wanted to fight Sukuna with his entire experience. It's like two lovers trying to please each other, but only one leaves satisfied. They cannot receive love by conventional means due to their position, right? Even Shoko highlighted that she could never have fallen in love with Gojo even if hell froze over. So in parallel with Yoruzu's revival in the Culling Games, she tries to show Sukuna that there are people as strong as him, that his solitude belongs to herself, and that they can get married. However, since Sukuna is above everyone and understands true Jujutsu, his domain expansion introduced so early in the story establishes his divinity as if he's painting an impossible masterpiece, a work of art, not on a canvas but on thin air. That's why in chapter 225, Kashimo refers to Sukuna like a god, and later in chapter 238, he uses his X-ray vision to see Sukuna's original body as perfection. Kashimo is mesmerized to the point of calling the king of curses, the man that spreads the ultimate misery in the world, the definition of beauty. Beautiful. This is because he has evolved just to be the perfect killing machine. He can make hand seals whilst two of his other hands are free to fight or defend, or even use his cursed tools. But it doesn't even stop there. Sukuna has multiple mouths to help him chant his incantation without any breaks. This evolution allowed him to destroy everyone in the Heian era, every single elite sorcerer family, even facing 20 of them at once only for them to lose. In fact, the gap between Sukuna and everyone else is so wide that the story, every theme, every cornerstone of each character is just catching up to him and his strength. As a result, Yoruzu can't be compared to him to satisfy his needs, as Sukuna instantly deduces her technique as the perfect sphere, claiming it's boring, as curse techniques like hers, which are energy based, always end up the same. Therefore, he's already adapted to it and has so much experience in Jujutsu that no one can quench his thirst. This isn't even the first time Sukuna has stated this, as Nanako and Mimiko's mobile technique is also instantly deciphered by him, and he proceeds to call it boring. Similarly, Gojo couldn't even have hobbies because whatever he did would be mastered rapidly and lead to boredom once again. As a result of this superiority over everyone else in existence, Sukuna is assumed to feel isolated at the top of the mountain. But the truth is, his solitude led him to relentless aggression like a calamity. This links to Itadori's question on why Sukuna spread so much misery. misery. In response, he tells Itadori that flies and insects should just die in misery rather than clinging onto life. Why do they continue to be weak as life itself is suffering and pain? Much like the Buddhist philosophy of the cycle of samsara. In Buddhism, desire and ignorance lie at the root of suffering, and this misery is what fuels curse energy and Sukuna's dominance over the world. That is why Gege used Yorozu's character to literally personify this metaphor, as her technique made her an insect. Sukuna distinguishes a clear line where morality becomes fragile and meaningless to those on top. These people shed all likeness to others. Though on the surface, Gojo might seem different, in reality, he isn't. Even as a teenager, Gojo calls cursed users who try to kill him small fry, just like Sukuna would. This sentiment is highlighted again by Gege in chapter 237 with Kashimo, who is a character foil to both of them, as he too had the title of strongest in his era 400 years ago. No one was able to challenge him or even force him to use his one-time curse technique. He was bored and lonely until Kenjaku made him an offer to face Sukuna, as he had never seen someone stronger than him in 600 years. This gave Kashimo the same perspective as he questioned Sukuna. Did you become the strongest, or were you born as the strongest? He wanted to know if Sukuna even interacted with others without knowing weakness. Kashimo asks if it's even possible to feel love for other people, as he himself was too strong to the point where every other human was nothing more than fragile dust in front of his existence. And since curse techniques reflect your reality, Kashimo's technique disintegrates everything around him into that very thing he believes. Hence, he requests Sukuna to teach him if the curse of being the strongest is to wander endlessly in the path of loneliness, all in order to manifest their power. In response to this, Sukuna calls them greedy, because Gojo and Kashimo want to be the strongest, but also have human emotions that fulfill their loneliness. And then they expect him, of all people, to teach them. The expectation and self-projection of loneliness has been imposed on Sukuna. They all assume Sukuna too must have felt this same existential problem. However, Sukuna is absolutely free from any chains. Sukuna didn't need anything from anyone, and though Gojo called him the challenger, the reality couldn't have been more different, as Sukuna answers Kashimo's question, explaining the love that they seek is absolutely worthless. In reality, the Gojo and Kashimo who were yearning for it didn't truly understand the true meaning of love like him. To Sukuna, he interacts with others and shows his love by killing those who challenge him, as he fulfills their purpose of giving them a true fight. Amongst the countless L's Sukuna has handed out to powerful sorcerers in his lifetime, not one has cursed him, and that's because, like Gojo, their needs have been satisfied. If that isn't affection and kindness, then what is? This is the love and affection displayed by the powerful. Kashimo then questions if Sukuna is really satisfied with this type of transaction. Even cursed spirits like Jogo, Sukuna stated, stand proud, you're strong, as in the end, he is always the one who's fulfilling the love of those who seek to test their strength, rather than being fulfilled himself. Gojo and Kashimo being an example. In response, Sukuna explains, because he understands what love is, he can reject it at any time, as he deems it to be worthless. This is why he never once thought of being fulfilled by another person, as he can easily fulfill himself. The actions he does are the very reflection of this. He can eat what he wants, kill who he wants, and play with whom he wants. Sukuna lives free and alone from all attachments, and if others can't deal with that, then that's their problem. In fact, his dialogue with Jogo tells us a lot about this, as Sukuna expresses the importance of taking hold of one's desire, disregarding everything else entirely, with the idea of the need to flock together and to have a defined identity. That is a weakness that stunts their growth. In the end, Sukuna and Gojo are meant to portray two sides of the same coin. However, Sukuna is the embodiment of what one could call individualism and extreme selfishness, which favors the freedom of action and growth of the individual over that of the group. For example, in chapter 199, Angel abides by God's law and stated her sole purpose is to destroy Sukuna, but even she chose to be symbiotic with Hana Kurusu rather than taking over her body and soul, even though it would have been beneficial to her and would have avoided the mistake Hana ultimately made against Sukuna in chapter 212. Sukuna would call Angel an idiot for making such a mistake by holding on to such ideals. Therefore, in contrast to everyone else, Sukuna is the personification of selfishness that comes at the cost of everyone around him. Now, to enjoy more peak fiction, why not watch this video on your screen right now regarding Boruto's new powers in the time skip?